The Man-Thing. There is a swamp in Florida, near the town of Citrusville, which is a confluence of strange events. In the swamp, the barriers between dimensions are at their weakest, and otherworldly beings intrude into our reality. People are stripped down to their barest emotions, their essential selves, and the very gates of time and space can be traversed by those with the skill and the courage, but at great peril. One false step and your life and your body can be changed forever. Don't believe me? Just ask Ted Sallis. Not that he can answer you. Not anymore. Because Ted was transformed into the grotesque swamp elemental, the Man-Thing. Even before his transformation, Ted Sallis was no ordinary man. A gifted but eccentric biochemist, he had been in charge of Project Sulfur, a controversial series of experiments intended to enable humanity to cope with the increasing number of pollutants in the environment. The project succeeded, but not in the way it was expected to. In order to immunize humans against toxic chemicals, the serum mutated them into monsters. His experiences on Project Sulfur made Sallis paranoid, and when he was assigned to Project Gladiator, a government-sponsored research program intended to develop a super soldier serum akin to that which had created Captain America, Sallis withdrew even from his closest colleagues in the final stages, refusing to commit his calculations to record. He carried all his work in his mind and exiled himself from the laboratory, with only his girlfriend, Ellen Brandt, for companionship. But as the saying goes, just because you're paranoid, it doesn't mean they're not after you. Sallis's concerns were justified in this instance, as one of his co-workers was in the employ of AIM, Advanced Idea Mechanics, trying to steal the formula. Sallis's isolation successfully thwarted this plan, but he failed to see the danger closer to home. His beloved Ellen was also in the pay of AIM, and when he visited his contact, Hamilton, to hand over the only physical sample of the formula, Ellen slaughtered Hamilton, then set Ted up to be kidnapped and tortured for the formula. Fighting free of Ellen and her AIM employers, Sallis drove frantically through the swampland with them in hot pursuit. Aware that they were gaining on him, he took desperate steps to prevent them gaining the formula. He injected the only existing sample into his own body. Then he attempted to take his own life by driving into the swamp itself so he could not be forced to surrender the formula. When his car sank, that should have been the end of Ted Sallis' story. But his strange second existence was just beginning. As Sallis began to drown, the unstable chemicals in his body interacted with the swamp's unique properties to bring about an amazing transformation within him. His body changed into that of the creature later called the Man-Thing, a hulking, fibrous mass of mud and vegetation, held together in a vaguely humanoid shape only by the remnants of what had been Sallis's mind. The super soldier serum granted him phenomenal strength and durability, but the eldritch forces of the swamp corrupted it, making him both more and less than human. Motivated only by vestigial memories, he shambled onto the road, and directly into the path of the treacherous Ellen and her accomplices. His massive body brought their speeding car to a halt, and the two men were easily defeated. Ellen, cowering in fear, recoiled from the Man-Thing, unrecognizable as her former lover. He reached for her and discovered that a manifestation of his empathic nature meant that whatever showed fear burned at his touch. Her face scarred and her mind destroyed, Ellen fled into the swamp, leaving Man-Thing alone in the darkness. Although Sallis's mind was lost and subsumed into Man-Thing's body, some of his distorted memories still drove its grotesque form. Wandering seemingly aimlessly, the Man-Thing was drawn to the laboratory of his former colleagues on Project Gladiator. Threatened by what appeared to be superstitious locals, the scientists were on the verge of being harmed, perhaps killed, when the Man-Thing intervened. Shocked at the monster's appearance, the scientists were nevertheless curious, and one, the elderly Dr. Calvin, sensed that he somehow knew the creature. Perhaps Dr. Calvin's intuition might have led to a cure for the Man-Thing, but just as she was on the verge of communicating with him, she was shot in the back by the locals, leaving her critically injured and comatose. Two other members of Sallis's team, Barbara Morse and Paul Allen, then enlisted the aid of the Jungle Lord, KsMr, in the attempt to locate Sallis. Dr. Morse, a SHIELD agent, had been planted with Project Gladiator after intelligence sources revealed the possibility of an AIM traitor within its staff. When AIM struck, Paul Allen, Dr. Morse's fiancé, was quickly revealed as the traitor, but he met his fate at Man-Thing's hands. As Morse and KsMr rescued Dr. Calvin, Man-Thing destroyed the AIM nest. Among the swamp's mystical properties is apparently the ability to reduce people to their essential selves. Obsessions and desires become paramount, and each person who enters becomes embroiled in a conflict revolving around their personal dilemmas, though not always in a way they had hoped. Man-Thing himself is often merely a catalyst in these dramas, and no one passes through the swamp unchanged. Or, to put it more succinctly, people stumble into the swamp, have a crisis, Man-Thing looms up, and our temporary heroes either get it, get through it, or snuff it. However, it was not long before more complex events took place, reflecting the true nature of the swamp as a focal point between dimensions. The catalyst this time was in the form of a local girl, Jennifer Kale, who was heiress to a long line of mystical practitioners. Her first misguided spell, using a book stolen from her grandfather, summoned the nether demon Thog from his other realm to wreak havoc. This began Man-Thing's long involvement with both Thog and Jennifer. Jennifer's growing powers further weakened the fabric between dimensions, and she and her family, her brother Andy and grandfather Joshua, who was head of the eldritch cult of Zerad-Nar, discovered that the swamp was the nexus of all realities, a focal point in the balance between worlds. Voyaging to one such world, Jennifer met Dakimf the Enchanter, who confirmed that said balance was perilously fragile, and that a guardian was needed to protect it. He declared that a mismatched group of beings from other planes of existence, Man-Thing, Jennifer, Korek the Warrior, Prince of Catharta, and Howard the Duck, were, with Dakimf himself, the chosen five needed to defeat Thog. They triumphed, but at the apparent cost of Howard's life, and Jennifer entered a new phase of her life as Dakim's apprentice. Dakim revealed that on Earth, the Man-Thing's role was to be the guardian of the nexus of all realities, and although the Man-Thing's adventures have occasionally drawn him away from the swamp, he seems destined to remain guardian for as long as the nexus continues to exist. Stranger beings were being drawn to the swamp and to its neighbouring town of Citrusville. A local construction company headed by F.A. Scheist sought to drain the swamp for redevelopment. However, they came into conflict with the local Native American population, and the violent emotions raised drew Man-Thing into the fray once more. Ultimately, Scheist's true agenda was revealed. He was seeking the fountain of youth that was reputed to exist in the area. Scheist was successful in his quest, though not in the way that he intended. He ended up a victim of his own greed. The extraterrestrial refugee, Wundar, also ended up in the swamp when he rocketed to Earth from his seemingly doomed homeworld of Dakam. With the body of a young man but the mind of a child, Wundar's confused belief that Man-Thing, the first creature he had seen on emerging from his spaceship, was his mother. Coupled with his great strength, this almost resulted in the swamp creature's destruction. Richard Rory, a nerdy 20-something disc jockey, everyman, average Joe, found his life forever changed when he got in lost with the swamp, and he was saved by Man-Thing. That was the beginning of a long association. Most of Man-Thing's conflicts were external, events which he was drawn into unwittingly. One nemesis sought him out, however, the Fool Killer, a self-styled divine scourge with a quest to obliterate those he found unworthy. He sought out Sallis for his involvement in SO2, the serum which would have transformed humanity into pollution-breathing monsters. Born a cripple, but brought to health seemingly by divine intervention at the hands of a travelling healer named Reverend Mike, the Fool Killer became obsessed with those who were wastrels, defiling the gift of life. When Reverend Mike proved to be mortal and fallible, the Fool Killer slew him too, preserving his remains in a perverse shrine. When the Fool Killer cornered two of his targets, F.A. Scheist and Richard Rory, in his own lair, the deaths were prevented only by the appearance of Man-Thing, who distracted the Fool Killer long enough for Rory to tackle him, causing the Fool Killer's shot to go astray. The misdirected shot shattered the tank containing the remains of Reverend Mike, causing a glass shard to pierce the villain's heart. On one of its rare excursions outside the swamp, the Man-Thing was briefly reunited with his old companions, Jennifer Kale, Korek, and Damk the Enchanter. When they battled the usurper Clonus, who had slain Korek's father and stolen the throne of the realm of Catharta. Damk, Jennifer, and Man-Thing helped Korek overthrow Clonus, though Damk was slain in battle, but not before transferring his mystical energies to Jennifer. Initially dependent on the swamp for his very survival, the Man-Thing grew weak and enervated when separated from its environs for too long. One incident changed all that, however. Sorensen, an elderly but vigorous labourer, lost his mind after being forced to retire. He began a murderous crusade as the Viking, fighting against all that he considered modern, decadent, and unmanly. This played into the hands of a local busybody and censorious harridan, Olivia Selby. The pair began a match made in hell, book-burning, rabble-rousing, and inciting the good citizens of Citrusville to destroy the Man-Thing. Or so they thought. In reality, the Man-Thing's remains flushed through the Citrusville water and the sewage system itself. He underwent another metamorphosis and was reborn with the ability to survive for longer periods away from the swamp. Ultimately, the increasing insanity surrounding Citrusville was explained as the long game of Thog, who had been inducing people to surrender their damaging emotions, anger, fear, lust, into a literal pyramid scheme. The accumulated emotions were stored in a mystical casket, ready for Thog to unleash a torrent of emotions on the world. But it was revealed at this point that although the enchanter's physical body had perished, his spirit had visited comic book writer Steve Gerber, who turned out not to be inventing the Man-Thing's adventures, as he thought, but merely transcribing events that had taken place on another plane of reality. The enchanter and Gerber were witnesses to Man-Thing's ultimate battle with Thog, in which the balance of realities were temporarily restored. Since this, the Man-Thing has undertaken a nomadic existence. His wanderings have taken him to all corners of the globe, and into encounters with, among other illustrious citizens of the Marvel Universe, Spider-Man, Shang-Chi, the Fantastic Four, the Hulk, She-Hulk, and more than one reunion with Howard the Duck. Rumours of his death were greatly exaggerated. But he always returns to the swamp, to the nexus of all realities, to replenish his energies. If he can be said to desire anything, the Man-Thing desires peace. Violent emotions disturb him and cause him to lash out, so it seeks a tranquil existence. Yet time and time again, events occur within the swamp to draw it into violent conflict, as it fulfills its unwitting, barely sentient destiny.